Welcome to Town Meeting TV's Under the Dome, where we get to go into Montpelier and take a look at what's going on in the legislature through the gift of conversations with local legislators. I have today with me Abby Duke, who's representing the Old North End and the New North End parts, Chittenden District 17. She was first appointed when Mayor Mulvaney Stanek had to step down in 2024. And then you were followed that year with an election in November. So you're a freshman legislator.
Correct.
Yeah. You've been an entrepreneurial food provider, starting in the garden and then launching Sugar Snap, which we're all familiar with. And something that I found amazing was that after serving more than 600,000 meals to Vermonters during COVID, you sold the business to long-term employees. You sit on the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. Welcome. And sitting to your right is Bram Kleppner, also a Democrat in the south end of Chittenden, Burlington, in Chittenden 13. You took office also in November, after the election in November of 2024. You are have an established career, 13 years as the CEO of Danforth Pewter, and then you worked in international business development with Ben & Jerry's. Is that correct?
That's all correct.
Yeah. You served on the Vermont Climate Council and the Vermont Tax Structure Commission and the Governor's Medical Advisory Board. So you brought to the legislature some experience in working in state government and regulation, and you sit on the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. There we go. Welcome to you both. The first question I'm going to ask you is just to unpack what are the names of those committees. What do you do? What's the charge? So we'll start with you, Bram. House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee.
Sure. And everyone knows what energy means, and no one knows what digital infrastructure means. So we're half and half. So we provide oversight to the state's utilities, to the energy providers, and work on legislation to keep energy in Vermont affordable, to keep electricity rates low, to keep the regulated utilities, Vermont Gas, low, and so forth. We also do what we can to support the energy system in Vermont becoming cleaner over time. So supporting the transition to renewables and the transition to electrification in people's homes. Digital infrastructure, the main charge is to provide oversight to the tens of millions of your dollars that the state government spends on its own IT systems. We are in the midst of two huge projects now. One is a project for people applying for state aid, for unemployment benefits, for instance, for the application and the qualification process to be much easier and much less burdensome and time-consuming for Vermonters who need those. And the other is one that will not be visible for the most part to Vermonters, but the state has a large number of very old IT systems, some 60 years old, 60-year-old large computers that they are counting on. And the computers are failing, and the number of people who know how to program in COBOL, for instance, one of the languages that our stuff is in, is vanishingly small. So replacing all of those systems with an integrated cloud-based system is a large, complicated, fraught project that we are keeping very close tabs on to make sure it doesn't disappear into a rabbit hole of additional spending and additional requirements and so forth.
Just, you don't have to spend too long in the weeds here, but which systems are you replacing, that last?
So some of the big systems, the Agency of Transportation and the Agency of Administration, both have old systems, and they have unemployment and in particular and transportation have a lot of federal requirements, federal reporting requirements. Yep. So they're fairly specialized IT systems. And when the state has tried in the past to get a single system across, they haven't been able to find one that handled those. So some systems are connected, some are disconnected, and
we certainly saw that during COVID. The unemployment system was coming to, was hitting a wall.
Yeah.
And so this is what you're talking about, that your committee is helping to oversee work like this on behalf of your constituents.
And yes, on behalf of the taxpayers across Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you. We'll get into that some more, but the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee, tell us a little bit about what your charge is.
Great, thank you. So our charge is issues related to economic development, because obviously it's in the name. Also workforce development, so the things like apprenticeship programs, the part of Department of Labor that focuses on how are we developing the skills of our workforce, how are we getting more people into the workforce, and also we have worked on the part of education reform dealing with career and technical education, with really a mindset of as a workforce development tool. We can talk more about that in a little bit. Also, banking and securities and insurance, all insurance products except health insurance. So it's much of what the Department of Financial Regulation does. Also includes actually crossover is workers' compensation insurance and unemployment insurance. And actually the unemployment insurance modernization is expected to go live this summer. We just got a report from the Department of Labor the other day about it, and they are in testing, sort of extended testing phase, and are hoping to launch it to the public in June. And then finally, we also work on consumer protection. So we've got a few things that we've been working on related to consumer protection, including data privacy, including regulating the event ticketing market, which I'd be interested in talking about at some point. And so those are the biggies. It's really, we work on a lot of different issues. So they're all somehow connected by commerce, I guess.
Yeah. I guess one of the things just to start to help people get a little insight is both of these, from my perspective, sound like in a way very dry committees. But you're probably dealing with some of the places that touch Vermonters in their most vulnerable places. So maybe just give us a little insight, a story, something that you heard while you're in your committee this year that gives us some more insight.
Sure. I mean, there's a hot one right now.
Yeah.
Our committee has been a bill. It seemed like a fairly obscure bill that started out with water meter technology, and at the moment, the law in Vermont is that if an electric utility, not water, but an electric utility, wants to upgrade the meter on your house to a smart meter, you have the right to opt out if you choose and stay with the old meter. And right now the utility cannot charge you for your choosing to stay with the old meter, even though it incurs cost, because now they have to send someone out. Instead of all the data flowing to them, they have to send someone out in a truck and a reader to read the meter. And
this is partly related to data privacy issues.
Sure.
And why people would refuse to have a smart meter.
There are concerns. The biggest concern seems to be around radio frequency, radiation's effects on human health. People are worried about having these transmitters on the side of their homes.
Yeah.
I will say, for the public's awareness, that the amount of radio frequency radiation from these things is meaningfully less than a cell phone. It's sort of very low level, low intensity, and as far as anyone knows, there are not negative human health effects. But there are people who are really concerned about this, and who, in fact, do believe there are harmful effects, and do believe there are studies that support their position. And we were contemplating doing nothing more particularly than allowing the utilities to charge someone if they chose to opt out of the upgrade. And the reason for that was that if the utility doesn't charge the customer, then that cost gets spread to all of their neighbors. And it seemed unfair for people to have to bear the cost of someone's individual choice for their own home. However, got a huge amount of email from people all over Vermont saying, you know, we have one of the best opt-out laws in the country. You don't have to pay to opt out. Don't make us pay. There are lower income people who shouldn't have to bear the burden of the cost of protecting their family's health and so forth. So there's a hot one, like live as we speak. I'm sure in the time since we started, I've probably gotten 3 more emails
You're getting a lot of,
on that subject
yeah.
from people who are concerned about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do work on a lot of pretty dry topics, I think it's fair to say, but dry topics that can have some real impact,
Yep.
right, based on decisions. So the example I'm going to give is we have been working on a comprehensive data privacy bill. Earlier in the session, we worked on a bill associated with regulating data brokers, updating our data broker registry law, and also creating an ability for Vermonters to request to delete their data. Be able to.
For folks who don't know, data broker, somebody who's buying and selling and trading
That's right.
information about Vermonters in this case.
That's right. So Vermont had the very first data broker registry law in the country. I think it's about 10 years old. Maybe it was 2018. So the first law that required, if you're a data broker in Vermont, you have to register. And then, and so that way, you know, we know, and we know who is buying and selling data in the state. The law we passed, and it's in the Senate still right now, just updates that law and creates a mechanism for Vermonters to be able to reach out to a data broker and say, I want you to delete my data. California has a what's called the Delete Act, where I've actually created a one-stop shop where you can go, a Californian can go to a website and request that their data be deleted from all brokers. For us, we're going a sort of a step in that direction, but California also has it's a significant investment to create a system like that. So our data broker law would at least create the ability for, right now you can't, if you reach out to a data broker and say delete my data, they don't necessarily have to. So this law would at least require that they have to delete your data. The comprehensive data privacy bill is setting parameters about how businesses across the state handle our data. You know, we are living in a world in which data has become a commodity, really, and there's so many different kinds of data about us that are being collected by lots of different businesses and organizations. Turns out, though, creating a comprehensive data privacy bill is very complicated, especially as a small state, a small rural state. So we are really trying to balance what is the right thing to do for Vermonters without creating all kinds of unintended consequences because it's sort of almost, the regulations have to be operable with other states is sort of one way to look at it.
I mean, why are we creating these regulations on a state-by-state basis and not on a federal level?
Well, it should be done on a federal level, and we're doing it at a state-by-state level because it's not being done on a federal level.
And are you running into, so let's just quickly get into sort of that impact of federal policies and maybe federal funding cuts. I mean, certainly cuts to solar that is affecting you all in your committee, and then effects around, can we regulate data? Can we regulate AI that may be hitting your committee? Where are you seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, we in terms of the data side, I mean, early in the session we had a briefing from our legislative council talking about the AI. There was an executive order from Trump, if you remember, saying that was going to say states cannot regulate AI. sort of trying to understand what does that really mean. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty about what will be coming from the federal level, and I think every state legislature in this country has to determine, like, what can we do on our own to protect our citizens, and what is the right thing to do, and it is not simple at all.
Are you seeing those impacts? Are you seeing sort of conversations around what's going on in the federal level hit your committee?
Yeah, absolutely. And from early on last year, it was clear to us that we were going to be playing some defense in terms of protecting Vermont's environmental laws, protecting our clean energy transition, and at least holding the line. If we can't make a lot of forward progress, at least not having things rolled back. And we have certainly been the recipient of numerous efforts to roll back Vermont's environmental legislation and clean energy legislation, which we have, I think, successfully held the line on. And in terms of particularly the loss on December 31st of tax credits for residential solar, we've absolutely heard from the Vermont solar industry that it's costing them business, it's costing jobs. People trained in clean energy are having to go outside the industry to find work. I will say that Vermont's residential solar installers have developed ways to sort of work around that. The tax credits for a homeowner to buy solar and install it have gone away, but for commercial installations, they have not yet. That was delayed by a bit, so a lot of residential installers are now leasing the equipment and turning it into a commercial operation instead of residential operation, and passing the commercial tax credits through to the homeowner so that the benefits remain and it still makes sense for people to do. We have, in fact, this year in particular, having sort of, when the world had stabilized a little bit, we're in fact able to do things to support the expansion of Vermont's clean energy industry. So
now we lost the clean, there was the, sort of the brouhaha around the clean heat standard a couple of years in the making. Did that come through your committee, or where was that in the process?
Yeah, it did, and there was a lot of misinformation. There were people saying it was going to raise the cost of a gallon of heating oil. I think A&R had done a back of the napkin. It's going to be 70 cents a gallon. The governor at one point said $4 a gallon. The Ethan Allen Institute said $7 a gallon. And it actually would have been something like 7 cents a gallon. So 10 times lower than A&R's and 100 times lower than the Ethan Allen's Institute. But, it was enough of a concern for people that the legislature decided not to move forward with implementing that standard. In retrospect,
And that would have sort of forced or put pressure on new buildings to use electric energy instead of gas or other types of fossil fuel. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it would have funded the transition with a small increase in the cost of, as I say, 7 cents a gallon or something. And with home heating oil having gone up $2 a gallon because of the recent war.
Yep.
It was sort of, you propose a small tax and everyone's up in arms, and then when someone starts a war and there's a huge burden, $4.59 a gallon, people sort of shrug. So
I think of those as sort of the invisible ways that Vermonters are bled by billionaires, which is not to give, to put too fine a point on it. There are credit card surcharges that tax you at the dollar. There are ways that money is leaving the state that is nothing more than a tax.
Yeah.
But we're not in control of that. They're non-democratic taxes. So I guess just talk a little bit about that. You're talking about who you're hearing from for information, who you're getting, who are you hearing from as you sit in there? And you're both, new to the legislature, which gives you this amazing perspective to not have been sort of inoculated fully, right?
Yes.
You're able to kind of see with clear glasses. So just talk about what it's been like to come up to speed, and what are you surprised about who you're hearing from and who you're not hearing from as you do your work?
So, I guess I'd start as I think probably your audience knows, and it's a citizen legislature, right? So in the House, there's 150 of us on 14 different committees, and the range of life experience is very broad, which makes it honestly a really interesting place to work, because the perspectives people bring, the skills they bring is kind of all over the map. And so you're on a committee with, my committee is 11 people from across the state with very different, they're bringing very different experiences. So we're all, some of these issues, there are people on the committee who know a lot about it. There's other stuff we're learning about it for the first time. So we get information that comes to us through the testifying process, through the process of people coming and testifying. There are certainly advocates and lobbyists who are paid to bring us information, right? That is helpful. And my tact has always been, you just always want to know who, when you're talking to somebody, what perspective are they bringing, right? So advocates and lobbyists can be extremely useful, but you have to have your eyes open about what their perspective is. And then trying to look beyond that and say, okay, who are the people that this issue is affecting that aren't here? Because that is always a really important question, is who is not here, and how can I find out more information from them? And then there's the sort of people in the community who reach out, like, mostly by email, sometimes by phone, or people who are coming into the building. And a lot of the emails we get are, result of action alerts. An organization sends out something to their members saying, hey, this is happening in the State House, you should reach out to your legislators. And so we'll hear from people, especially, I bet 90% of the time I hear from constituents, it's usually as a result of an action alert, which is helpful information. It's also good to know that it's a result of an action alert, because I take that information slightly differently than I do if it's not. But that's something that I'm always asking myself, is who is this issue affecting, and who are we not hearing from? And then trying to kind of go outside of the legislative process to be like, how can I reach out to some of those organizations or people to get their perspective?
I would agree. We get information from all the sources that Abby identified. One I would also add is that people are very generous in responding to our request that they come testify in our committee. So we have, some ability to say who would we like to hear from on this issue and invite them in, and we generally get to hear from more or less everyone we want to. I mean, there's some people who can't make it for whatever reason. So, we do have a lot of hours of witness testimony and conversation and questions when there's a topic. As Abby said.
Who are some of the folks that you heard from this legislative session?
We often will invite in both representatives from the utilities, Green Mountain Power and Vermont Electric Co-op, Washington Electric Co-op, along with clean energy advocates like the people from Renewable Energy Vermont. So, trying to get those, they're not on opposite sides of issues, but they are different perspectives on issues like that. The Energy Action Network and people like that. I would say on the subject of the diversity of opinions in our 150 member body and backgrounds, that is true, and there are a lot of really good people from very diverse backgrounds. It is also true that it's a little bit of a myth that it's a citizen legislature. It's one of the Vermont myths that we hold close to our hearts because we like it so much. Mm-hmm. But the fact that the legislature doesn't pay nearly enough to pay the bills, but takes up way too much time to have a job, screens out a huge number of Vermonters from service. Yeah. There are retirees, and there are people who have a partner at home who makes enough money to pay the bills and has access to health insurance. There are business owners, there are farmers, there are teachers who take the semester off. There are a few young idealistic people who the legislative pays more than they make waiting tables, so like that half of the year is actually their lucrative half, but they only serve a term or two before they realize that it's not a sustainable path through an adult life. And as I said, there are a lot of good people in all those categories, but it does mean there are a lot of voices who are not there in the State House.
No, that's absolutely true. It's a citizen legislature, but does not represent all of Vermont.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and to be fair, you're all here. You work 4 days a week down in Montpelier. Well, it's probably 5 days a week because you're working here, coming to join us on your day off. Is that right?
Yeah, and
and then many people work through the summer on study committees as well.
And I'm trying to disprove what I just said. I am trying to manage a full-time job and the legislature this year.
Yeah.
And I am not doing it particularly gracefully, I would say, at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, last year I was still running my business and serving the legislature, and it's hard work, really hard to do both. And so I would just sort of tried to fit it in. It was sort of like having two full-time jobs at the same time.
Yeah. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago that it was resurfacing again, this concept of, moving from a citizen legislature to a full-time year-round legislature. Is that just off the table right now, or have you heard more rumors around that?
I think it's off the table. I think we don't have any money as a state, and as Abby said, we have a disproportionately large House of Representatives for the size of our state. So paying 150 people a year-round salary, I think would be, we just don't have the money.
And I think the conversation a few years ago was just about raising the pay, not about increasing the length of work. I personally think we should shrink the size of the House, increase the pay, not make it year-round, but create a system where it could be that we could have a greater diversity of people there, and not have it. Having that many representatives does make things particularly inefficient, I would say. It's really hard. It is really difficult to get things done and to get things through, and I do think we would potentially benefit from having fewer representatives and a bit more of a professional.
I would just add that in the world of political science, there is a rough guideline that the legislature, the number of seats in the legislature should be equal to the cube root of the population they serve. I don't know why that works or why anyone thinks that works, but per that rule, we should have like 85. I did the math at one point. We should have like 85 reps and not 150. Maybe it's 90 or somewhere in there, which would right-size our legislature according to someone's theory in political science.
Someone's cube root theory.
I've never heard that. That is really interesting.
Well, talking about things that are hard to solve and hard to get done, you mentioned the career and technical work touching the ed reform. We're looking at 7 districts now being proposed across the state for education reform. What are you hearing from constituents? What are you expecting to happen in the House this session with education reform?
You want to start?
Sure.
And then I can jump in.
Sure. So the House, I mean, for people who aren't following this as closely as we do and aren't living through every exciting minute of the ed reform debate, the law we passed last year, Act 73, the big education transformation law, was designed to aim at many fewer school districts. And it created the redistricting task force to research over the summer and fall and come back at the end of the calendar year in December to the legislature with 3 possible maps showing consolidated districts. That was what the law commissioned that task force to do. And that task force, with a lot of really good people, very experienced, thoughtful people, did a bunch of research, looked at Vermont's experience with Act 46, looked at the experience in Maine with forced school district consolidations in other places across the country to see what had worked and what hadn't. And it turned out none of them worked. It turned out there was, in fact, no data to suggest that forced mergers at the school district level.
And this is not, yeah, exactly, not schools.
Yeah.
Not you two have to get together as a
Right.
school, but
It's the school district level.
Yeah.
At that level, there is no data to suggest that that either saves money or improves educational quality. And as you point out, there are a lot of layers. There's the classroom level, there's the school level, there's the school district level, there's the supervisory district level, the supervisory union level, and the state level. But at the school district level, there was no evidence. So this year, the House passed the next step in educational transformation based on the redistricting task force's recommendation that it not include forced school mergers. The original bill from last year did include minimum class sizes, which will naturally force classroom and some school consolidation, which there is plenty of data to demonstrate that that will save money and improve quality in many cases. And the law requires forced sort of service buying pools among multiple school districts. It forces them into larger groups to purchase things, manage things like transportation spending and special ed spending, and things as mundane as buying whiteboards instead of district by district, a larger group. Again, plenty of real world experience to show how much money that saves. And we have one of those in southern Vermont already, which is a year old.
About that, and it's already been showing to save money.
It's already been showing to save money. So that's what we did. And oddly, the governor, in spite of the data and in spite of public opinion, seems really stuck on forcing school district mergers. And it is a mystery to us, but he has suggested that he'll veto the whole budget if he doesn't receive that on his desk.
Yeah, so that House Education Transformation Plan is the 7, I think they're called CSAs, Cooperative Education Service Agencies. So that's sort of, it's kind of like a district, but it's not, because it's not governance.
The supervisory unions.
That's right, because it's not governance, it's about services. So it would mean sharing some, like special education services, transportation services, purchasing. And then it also says, okay, school districts, we are going to make you talk to each other about merging. So it creates a process in which districts are required to meet with other districts that may make sense for them to merge with and create a pathway for merging. Because there will be situations where it does make a lot of sense for school districts to merge, but it doesn't require it. And my understanding is where we stand now is we're kind of waiting. So as everyone knows, the system works. It passes out of the House, goes to the Senate, and the Senate, I think, is passing their version out this week. My understanding is it doesn't vary dramatically from the House's version. I think there will be, we'll see, we'll wait and see what it looks like. Then the House and the Senate will need to do a conference committee to basically marry those two versions together. And then it goes to the governor's desk, and like Bram said, the governor has said that if he doesn't get what he wants, which is for forced mergers, he will veto the budget, which is, we need
And this is, just to be clear, these are two separate issues in one way for viewers.
There's three major bills that are sort of all intertwined and coming together for the end of the session. The budget, which literally funds the government starting July 1st. Education transformation, which is the next step in this multi-year process. And the third is called the yield bill. And the yield bill, it really sets the tax rate for the education, the property tax rate for the education fund, and is really the bill that funds the government.
And this is where the buy down is coming.
That's right.
So, yeah.
That's right. So those are kind of some interconnected issues.
And so how have you been, what are you hearing from constituents? You're in Burlington, you're both in Burlington, separate areas. What are you hearing from constituents? Do they care about this at this point? Are they?
I've not heard much at all from them recently. Last year with the original bill, Act 73, there was quite a bit of communication from constituents, mostly with concern. And certainly the people who work in education in Burlington, there was some concern about the content, but most of it was about the process. What I heard is just, we haven't been involved, and
It was quick.
it was quick.
And what I heard a lot from constituents right at the end of the session, and that was because the superintendent of the Burlington School District came out against the final bill and basically issued a reach out to your legislators because this is not going to be good for Burlington.
Yeah.
And so with my committee working on the career and technical education piece and being somewhat involved in education, the education discussion, I have been staying in touch with the school district, and they are, the biggest concerns from the Burlington School District perspective have to do with what happens with the funding, because we haven't talked about this idea of a foundation formula. Part of this whole transformation is changing the way we calculate how we fund schools, and that is something that we need to keep very close eye on, that it doesn't adversely impact schools like Burlington.
Yeah. Talk just a little bit about the impact of ed reform on career and technical education.
Yeah. So we have learned a lot about the way CTEs work throughout the state, and like many things in Vermont, it is fragmented and very different depending on where you are. So the way CTEs are governed, the way they're delivered, the quality, what's available is wildly different depending on where you are in the state. Some CTE centers are half day, some are full day, some have waiting lists, and it's actually very difficult to get into some of the programs. Others have capacity. Some are really high quality, some struggle a little bit more. So we spent a lot of time talking about how do we increase the quality across the state, how do we also change the system so that if you're a student in, say, Rutland, and your CTE, and that the CTE in that area had a lot of wait lists, but the CTE in Middlebury had a lot of space. But there are barriers from going from one area to another. Partially it's about funding, partially it's about transportation. So we spent a lot of time talking about how do we fit in changes to kind of harmonize all of these CTEs around the state to better serve Vermonters. So we did not, the changes mostly we made were about allowing the Agency of Education to do what is called rulemaking, which means updating the rules about how CTEs work in the short term. We think about it like there's the short term and then there's the future state, right? In 5 years, once this transformation has happened, what is the vision? What is it we want to be working towards? And there was really a lot of agreement that our goal, our long-term goal, is regional comprehensive high schools. So what I mean by that is a high school in which, as a student, you can take career and technical education classes, and you can also take general education classes. You have rich and robust offerings in all kinds of different topics. And in order to get there, we need to change the system. We also need to, there's going to need to be some school construction.
Would you still see under that system, you know, Burlington's doing the video and technical ed,
Yep.
and Essex is doing computer tech, and St. Johnsbury's doing
Yes.
farming tech. Like there'd
So-
still be separate.
Absolutely, an element of that.
Specialized. That's
There would be certain areas, because partially it's like regional specialties. Like what is it? Piece of CTEs has to do is what does that region need,
Yep.
right? And so you're not going to have aviation tech. Burlington has an aviation program.
Yeah.
Most other tech centers aren't going to have that.
Yeah.
So basically allowing tech centers to specialize, but also making it easier for a student in another region to take advantage of that specialty. And thinking about access, thinking about equity, thinking about transportation. The more you dig into it, the more complicated it is.
Yeah. You mentioned the 3 big charges, and of course the legislature has one big charge, which is to come up with a budget so that government can continue to function, and we, as citizens of the state or residents of the state, get to reap those benefits.
Yeah.
So where are we at with the budget?
I'd say the House passed, given the end of a great deal of federal funding, passed a really good budget. I may have mentioned this before because it's one of my favorite facts that Vermont is the only state in the union without a balanced budget law or amendment, and is also the only state that always balances its budget. It's always been a very collaborative process between the legislature and the administration. There's a consensus revenue forecast that they use in building the budget that everyone agrees on, and so forth. The budget this year increased something like 1.5% versus last year, which is below the rate of inflation. So in real terms, it's actually a slight decrease in government spending. So I'd say a pretty responsible budget. Which sort of makes it doubly irritating that the governor is threatening to hold that hostage because of education policy he doesn't like. The budget passed out of Senate Finance, is that right?
Yeah, so the budget passed, start with the House budget passed out of the House Appropriations Committee 11-0. So
right.
it was a bipartisan, it did not pass fully bipartisanly on the House floor, but in the committee it did, which is really, really important. That all people of all parties agree. That was very much a compromise budget. The budget has passed the Senate, has passed out of the Senate, their version, and there are some differences between the House version and the Senate version. And the conference committee starts tomorrow.
So you all put your good faith, effort, and trust in the conference committee
That's
to
right.
now work out the differences
That's
between
right.
these 2 budgets.
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
then it's going to go to the governor's desk.
That's right.
This year is, as Abby said, it's a uniquely complicated situation because the budget, the education bill, and the property tax yield bill are all in conference, in different conferences. But the conference committees have to work together because the 3 bills that come out have to work together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
And
don't.
so meanwhile, does your committee work continue in preparation for the next biennium, or are you just sort of waiting to see what happens with these 3 bills?
So my committee we're still working on the data privacy bill.
Yeah.
We're also still,
Which we won't see come to fruit this session, right?
we should.
Oh,
No, we
okay.
should. Well, here's the
Okay.
thing. Here's the thing. If we don't pass it out, it's like the end of the second year, the end of the biennium,
Gonna start over again.
everything goes away. So I think we are passing something out this week.
Okay.
What it is yet to be determined exactly, but I noticed it's on our agenda to try to pass. I think we need to pass it by Friday. If we can't, then it will die.
Okay.
But then there's also still some bills coming back and forth that are coming back, for example, from the Senate, that we will what happens is if the Senate, actually, I can give an example of this event ticketing
please.
bill, if
Yeah.
that would be great, because this is actually a good news, a good,
This
a
is
good
the
bill.
Noah Kahan. This Noah Kahan's bill. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he came in late, but he did come out in support of it, so we'll take that. We'll take that. But this is a bill that we started working on it last spring, and it was brought to us by venues and the Vermont Arts Council came to our committee and said, we are really struggling with event tickets that are being resold on a third-party market for very high prices and also in ways that trick consumers. So we heard from the Flynn, the Paramount, a number of other venues from around the state, as well as artists. Noah Kahan did not testify in our committee. He would have been welcome, but he didn't. And I'll give you an example of some of the harms. At the Flynn, they spend a minimum of $60,000 a year, basically having somebody whose primary job is to look for fraud. So if you are looking at a ticket, let's say an example, something we looked at, we used as an example this winter was the Book of Mormon was coming to the Flynn. So if you Google Book of Mormon, Flynn Theater, the first 10 sites that show up kind of would give you the impression that you're buying from the Flynn, but mostly you were not. It was a third party site that would either buy tickets from the Flynn and then upcharge and pretend like they were the Flynn, or give you the general impression, even though the Flynn still had tickets available at the regular price. We also heard testimony about situations where people would come to will call at, say, the Flynn or the Paramount and say, oh, I'm picking up these tickets, and the tickets didn't exist. So there are harms to the venues, because if you pay $200 for a $50 ticket and then you walk away with a bad feeling about the venue. Yeah. And a lot of harms to consumers who are either overpaying or not able to get tickets. So
I would also just quickly interject, part of that fraud was these sites that were pretending to be the Flynn would say, only 12 tickets left.
That's right.
So people thought they were buying the very last tickets, and that sort of justified the high price and so forth. And it turned out the Flynn had plenty of tickets at regular prices.
Yep. So we ended up passing out a bill that caps the amount that you can pay on a third-party site to 110% that you can charge. So, like if you go to, say, StubHub, and you want to resell a ticket that you had bought that you can't charge more than 110%. So that bill went to the Senate. The Senate made some changes, came back to us just the other day. And so we had a choice. We could be like, some of the changes were good. Some of the changes were like, well, it's not quite what we wanted. But do we make an amendment and then we have to send it back to the Senate? Yeah. Or do we concur and then it just goes to, assuming then it gets passed by the House and goes, actually it doesn't even go back to the House floor, it just goes to the governor's desk. So that's what we chose to do. So that bill, just the other day we passed out and is sitting in the governor's desk. So,
so place where
any fans out there, tell the governor to sign it.
Yeah, so government making an impact on how the workings of capital
that's right.
affect our lives in a small but meaningful way.
Yep.
Thank you both for being here with us. I want to just close out with maybe let us know how constituents get in touch with you, but also what does success look like for you at the end of this session? You're both are gonna run again.
We are running again.
You're both running again, so you like it. You like it enough to stick it out. So
Sure, be happy to. For the very few of my millions of fans who don't know how to get a hold of me, it's my email is my name, Bram @bramvt.com. And I'm always happy to hear from anyone wherever they live in Vermont, and occasionally across the country one does hear from people. I would really anyone who believes that we shouldn't be stuck on doing something that is likely to cause problems and costs should contact the governor and ask him to please let go of this, what could be a disastrous idea of forced school district mergers, and to support data-driven and experience-driven reform that actually will lower costs and improve quality. I think you know, our sort of doomsday scenario, you know, many states start the fiscal year without a budget, and they, you know, because it happens all the time, they just don't get it done, or whatever they do, they get in a fight with each other. And, you know, they have laws that say if you don't have a budget by July 1st, you just take last year's budget, add 2%, and go. We have never failed to have a budget in place, so we do not have a backup plan. If we don't have a budget in place by July 1st, state government shuts down, which will have very serious harmful effects on Vermonters in terms of can't get SNAP benefits, can't access Medicaid. There are all these state-level programs which will just shut down if they are not funded with a budget. So I would also ask everyone to persuade the governor as best as they can to not hold the budget hostage to an education negotiation. I think if we come out of this with a decent education bill and a decent budget, it will have been a really successful session.
Yeah, so I am also going to run again, and if anyone wants to reach me, it's aduke@ledge.state.vt.us. You can also Google me and find my website and email me that way. I came into the session really focused on sort of, with my background as a small business owner, how can I help focus more on economic development, especially economic development through supporting our really small businesses. You know, I feel like I've been able to make we've made some modest improvements in some of the small business technical assistance supports, and I really want to come back and work on that more next year. I agree with Bram that you know, the budget and you know, getting this education transformation bill through is incredibly important. Another pieces which we didn't touch, two other pieces which we didn't touch on, which are huge priorities, is housing and healthcare. But that's for another time.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned here, or you can tune in at youtube.com/Town Meeting TV to see more of this kind of program and other great programs. Be well.